Has your DM ever asked you for a backstory for your character? Were you happy to oblige? Were you unsure what your DM meant? Either way, stick around and join me as we discuss how to create dynamic backstories designed to make your characters more interesting, fun, and easy to run. Welcome to Heroes in the Making. I'm your lore weaver, Nikki, and from my last video, we learned what a backstory really is and why it's important to your game. Now we can move on to actually creating a backstory. The questions I see most often about this, even from players who've written them before, are 1. What does my dungeon master or DM want me to include in my backstory? 2. What are the different acceptable ways I can write a backstory for my DM? And 3. What are some examples of different types of backstories so I can decide what works for me and my DM? We know as players, we use our backstories as a roadmap or guidelines to help us stay in character and make decisions as our character would during the game. We also know our dungeon masters use our backstories for good storytelling by giving them ways to weave our characters' tales into their world for a more personal and engaging story. So what do our DMs want included in our backstory to make that happen? This may be the most difficult question to answer out of all three, because every DM is different and may want different things. However, to try and give you an informed answer, I've asked all my personal DMs, including my very first DM ever from a long time ago, what they like to see in a good backstory. With their combined experience of over 100 years of DMing, I have some fantastic answers for you. There are 3 things all 6 of them said that they want. The first, story hooks. By definition, a narrative or story hook is a literary device that catches a reader's attention at the very beginning and makes them interested enough to keep reading. In other words, a narrative hook hooks the reader into reading more. So in a role-playing sense, this translates to something that hooks the player into the story to make them want to experience more of the tale. Basically, your DM needs you to include things about your character which they can use to pull you into the story to deepen the personal nature of the plot and make their world seem more alive. This includes things like, what's your character's family history? Do you have secrets you don't want anyone to know, or are you an open book? Who do you know? Are they powerful? What type of impact did they have on you growing up? What are your thoughts on your upbringing? The society you grew up in? Is there something your character is ashamed of? There are many more options to consider here, but this at least gets you started. Character motivation and goals is the second thing all my DMs said that they like to see included in a backstory. They want to see the reason your character is adventuring. I gave a lot of examples for this in my last video, so I'll link that for you to check out if you haven't. However, I do want to mention a different perspective on motivation and goals I did not cover, but one of my DMs pointed out. By giving your DM your goals and your motivations, it gives them ideas they can use to tailor the game to suit character and/or player needs. It also gives them the ability to plot ways to use those goals to plant obstacles for your character or hero to overcome. It's another way to promote great storytelling together by making it personal to you and your character. The third most popular feature all my DMs said they look for is 1 or 2 significant or defining moments from your character's life. One of them interprets this as the moment your character becomes an adventurer, whether it's a decision or something that's forced. Another likes to see good experiences, something that comforted your character when they were younger, so it can be incorporated into the story when things get intense. This same DM says they look for either existing trauma or avenues to create traumatic experiences for good storytelling. An example of this is a character who saw their village get destroyed by an orcish horde as a child. Then later in the campaign, they get word of a horde attacking other villages and find out it's the same one from their childhood. All this helps the DM make their world more alive for you and pulls you, the player, further into the story. On a side note, this means character trauma, not player trauma. Though tabletop role-playing games have the surprising ability to work like therapy for personal trauma as well, this is why those safety tools are so important. For honorable mention, several of my DMs also said the question why is important to them. They like to see justification for your choices. Why is your character the class you chose? What inspired them to take up that particular heroic mantle? Were you raised on the streets, so stealing was your only option for survival and now you're a rogue? Were your parents part of a traveling carnival and you needed to pull your weight? So when you found you could sing, you chose to become a bard and sing for money? Were you following in your father's footsteps, so you joined the military like he did and now you're a fighter? One DM also wanted to know why a character is willing or capable of killing others, or why they're not. Are you a soldier? A pacifist? Do you only kill monsters and try to talk your way through any other conflict? Another said they want to know why a player chooses a specific alignment. What did your character experience in their lifetime to make them this way? Did you choose lawful good because you came from a benevolent kingdom with little crimes, so you're not used to seeing the cruelties of other places in the world? Are you chaotic good like Robin Hood and see the laws aren't really protecting the people, so you do what you can to give back to them? You get the idea. I also want to give a shout out to the one thing my DMs said they do not want in a good backstory. They don't want a full and complete story they can't have any creative license with. They need some things to be open-ended. Let's keep using that orcish horde I mentioned earlier as an example. If your backstory simply states an orcish horde destroyed your village, that leaves it open-ended and gives your DM the option to add them into the campaign later to make the story personal for you. However, if you state the horde destroyed your village, but then go on to say the very next village they tried to raid was ready for the attack and wiped out the horde before they went any further, you're closing that part of the story and making it difficult or even impossible for your DM to use in their storytelling later on. I think my DMs gave us a great list to get you started on an awesome backstory. Even with all this information though, the most important thing for you to do is talk to your DM and ask them what they want. Working closely with them will be rewarding by making the game more fun for you and will help you have your backstory ready before the campaign starts. Having your backstory ready by the deadline your dungeon master gives you is not only respectful, but helpful to everyone at the table because it gives your DM time to incorporate your story into their world. This brings us to my second point. What are different creative ways I can write a backstory for my DM? In my experience, DMs are happy to accept it however you're willing to give it to them. They're just happy you're doing it. But a few I spoke to did have some preferences, which I'll point out along the way. All of the following options are good, solid methods to set yourself up with a roadmap of how to play your character and to get your DM the information they need. Is this your first backstory and you're a little stumped on what to do? Are you crunched for time? Maybe you have some writer's block. Bullet points work just fine. It's a great way to list out things you feel are the most important for your DM to know about your character and hand it over. A good DM can do amazing things with this list. Don't be worried that it won't be enough. Something is always better than nothing. You're still spending time on it and really thinking about the direction you want to go with your character. Your DM may come to you with questions, but honestly, that's the case with any backstory you choose to write, however you choose to write it. Do you love creative writing or prefer to write everything out? Then write a story. The length of your backstory doesn't matter as long as you've covered everything your DM has asked for, so you could hand over a few paragraphs or a few pages. One of my DMs states he prefers a story written in the first person, or from your character's perspective. He likes how this technique allows you to give the character their own voice, and you can impart the flavor of your character, their attitude and personality, by how they describe themselves and their situation. This also lets you tell the DM only what your character knows, and you may find it easier to weave some mystery into the story for them to have fun with. Remember, you can always discuss more about what your character doesn't know with your DM later and let them run with it from there. You can also write your backstory from the third person or from the outside looking in. This does let you write in things your character might not know for your DM, but you should still make time for a one-on-one discussion to work those things out. You could even write from another person and their life's perspective, perhaps their mentor or even the antagonist, the villain of their story. Another way you can find inspiration for writing your backstory is from YouTuber and cosplayer Ginny D. She has an amazing list of character builder questions you can pull from to make your characters become more alive. In her own words, these aren't the big sweeping questions you ask your character like your biggest fear or your goal in life. She calls those the bones. The questions she offers help to flesh out your character so they become more real to you, like is your character a morning person or a night owl, a dog or a cat person? You can use any or all of these questions to assist you in writing your backstory and give your character more flavor and depth. I've linked both her video and her printable list of questions for you. Another of my DMs prefers to let their character's story develop over time. He likes to give the minimal amount of history and allow the character to become the hero during the campaign. While others include why they've become an adventurer in their backstory, he wants the DM to pick up his character in the story and let that be the point where he becomes an adventurer. This allows things to be added in organically later more easily, but doesn't mean you have to either work a bit closer with your DM or allow your DM complete creative license, like Taliesin Jaffe did with his character Molly in Critical Role Campaign 2. As a budding DM myself, I recently had a player choose this option. We worked through a few things together and I'm excited with the idea I've come up with for their character. I'll try to tell you later when they are watching. I also want to take this time to give newer DMs a bit of advice. Recently, a young DM came to me and said his players weren't giving him the backstories he'd requested. I told him to keep in mind his players may be newer and not really know how to write a backstory. They may be focused on other aspects of their life, school had just started, and may not have a ton of time, or they may not understand what he needs from them. I suggested he give them a starting point. Give them 3 to 5 questions he absolutely needs the answers to so he can get his game up and running. I told him to be sure to ask for each character's goals and motivation. I gave him a few examples of other questions to ask, ones we touched on in my last video, like their family life growing up, their financial situation, where they grew up, and so on. I explained to him that I've had a DM ask for a person in our character's life who is important to them, so that might be a good question to ask as well. There are lots of options here, and some players can get overwhelmed with too many choices. Giving a newer player, or anyone really, a small list of questions to answer may get their creative juices flowing, and you could be surprised by what you get back from them. Alright, on to my last point. Number 3, what are some examples of different types of backstories so I can decide what works for me and my DM? The first thing to remember with any hero is there's always a catalyst, something that causes a character to become an adventurer. It's up to you what that is. The second thing to remember is that it's okay to create a character to be like someone you admire in film or have read about in a book. One of my DMs made a point to say he stopped pushing for originality, that cliches are fine as long as the player connects with them. There are no new stories, only new angles. If you want to play Legolas, play Legolas, but make sure the story you create around him fits your DM's world. Now, if you're like me, you need to see examples of backstories to really get an understanding of how to write one. I need references, people I've seen or read about. As I run through several types of backstories, keep in mind there are numerous others I don't have time to cover, and some of the heroes I've put under one type of backstory may be able to fit under other categories. I like to think of it this way. There are many backstory umbrellas. These may overlap at times. No one backstory type fits your character, and your heroes may fit under one or more of these during creation or even throughout the campaign. This is perfectly fine and works to give your character more depth. Let's start with an easy one. The tragic backstory. A lot of DMs will say this is overused, but there is a reason why tragic backstories are a thing. They work. Think of almost every Disney movie you've ever seen. Most princesses have lost one or both parents, and don't even get me started on Bambi. There's nothing wrong with creating a tragedy to motivate your character into heroism. Perhaps you accidentally killed a high-ranking noble, or you watched an orcish horde destroy your village. I had the hardest time coming up with a short list to talk about here because there are so many. We've got Marvel's Black Widow, but honestly, so many comic book superheroes fit under this umbrella. Like, a lot. And yes, even Luke Skywalker is under this umbrella. He literally becomes an adventurer when his aunt and uncle are... Nope. No spoilers this time. Not doing it. Moving on. Quest-driven backstories. These are characters whose reason for adventuring is the personal decision to undertake an important quest. Maybe you want to find a family member who disappeared in your village, or you had an artifact stolen from it which kept it safe and you want to return it to the village elder. We can very obviously envision Indiana Jones as a quest-driven hero. However, this also includes Thorin Oakenshield and his loyal party of dwarves, who chose to return home to reclaim the throne and their mountain from the squatter Smaug. Just don't tell him I called him that. Perhaps your character chooses to become an adventurer, or it's actually your job. You could be the Duke's captain of the guard, or maybe you've decided you just want to be a pirate and sail the seas for adventure. Pick a Starfleet captain. Kirk, Picard, Janeway, this is their life. Captain America fits under this umbrella as well. He chooses to be part of an experimental program to produce super soldiers. Our next umbrella is survival. This type of backstory is written in a way to show your character has no other choice but to become an adventurer to survive. We've already discussed becoming a rogue because you live on the streets and have no other way to provide for yourself. You could also be crossing the continent with your family and several others, and when they stop for a break, you fall asleep under a tree only to be left behind. Here we have Conan the Barbarian, who starts his life out as a slave and becomes an adventurer when he escapes. I've also included Westley from my favorite movie, The Princess Bride here. Well, he at first chooses to set out to make his fortune so he can marry Buttercup. He is later forced to become an adventurer as a matter of survival by the dread pirate Roberts, who captures him on the high seas and threatens his life every night. This is where he learns fencing, fighting, true love, miracles. Okay, maybe just the fencing and fighting part.
Fencing, fighting, torture, revenge, giants, monsters, chases, escapes, true love, miracles.
Maybe your character becomes an adventurer because someone approaches you and offers you something in return. You complete a quest for them and they'll give you money, jewels, a permanent job, a home. Someone sees you picking a lock when you shouldn't and hires you for a heist. Or the king calls for adventurers to find his lost child and offers a reward, so you answer. Evie promises to free Rick O'Connell from prison in The Mummy if he'll show her the way to Hamunaptra, the city of the dead. Bell's Hells and Critical Role Campaign 3 also go here, with Lord Estros as their patron. One idea that might be a little different, your backstory could be based on who you are instead of something you've done. This is one way to allow a character's trauma and story hooks to be game-driven, especially if you're choosing the option to let your story develop over time and for the campaign itself to be the reason you're adventuring. This choice, more than any other, doesn't mean you need to talk to your DM. Because if you're a lost member of the royal family or a descendant of an important historical figure, for example, your DM will need to add that into their world building. My youngest suggested Doctor Who could go here, though he could fit under tragic as well. People know and depend on him because he is the Doctor. Even Harry Potter could fit here, the boy who lived. His actions become more important the more he understands his history, but who he is definitely more important than what he's done at first, considering his story starts when he's a baby. Here's a concept. What if your character is happy and well-adjusted, but they just want to adventure? There are people who just feel called to adventure, though it's rare. Often they get sort of nudged into it. It could be that your character is wanderlust and wants to experience all the world has to offer. Or maybe you enjoy learning about other cultures and want to write a book about all the people you meet. One of my favorite heroes, Willow Ufgood, is a happy character. He's married to a wonderful wife with 2 beautiful children, but he's called to help Elora Danan safely back to the humans and ultimately beyond. The other person who comes to mind is Superman. While he has seen his share of tragedy, he seems like a pretty happy guy and well-adjusted hero. He grows up with a good family, learns to control his powers, and loves both his parents. Superman is one of those characters who fits under many umbrellas. We could also fit him under adventuring for moral reasons. These are more your vigilante types. Perhaps you live in a big city with a corrupt sheriff, so you try and free innocent people from his jail. Or alternatively, you could make your home in the forest and vow to protect your animal friends by eliminating all poachers who enter it. Robin Hood fits here. He fits under a few umbrellas, actually. He flees to Sherwood Forest to escape the unjust, lawless sheriff so he can be free to save the starving people who are being bled dry of their coin, robbing from the rich to feed the poor. Batman fits here too, but he could also fit under at least 3 other umbrellas on top of this one. Maybe your character is fated to be an adventurer, like literally, a you are the chosen one type of scenario. You're the only one of your bloodline who is born a sorcerer, and because of this, you're next in line for the throne. Or your birth was foretold by the gods, and you were born for a specific purpose. This is definitely Buffy, the one girl in all the world who's a slayer. King Arthur can also go here, with his "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king, born of all England." Fate seems wordy. Which brings me to my last but not least umbrella. Surprise! These are your heroes thrown into unexpected situations they weren't prepared for. Maybe you fell asleep in modern times and wake up in a fantasy world. Or your baby brother is stolen by the Goblin King and you've got to save him before he becomes a... Wait, I've definitely seen this one before. This example also applies to Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, and even Claire from the Outlander series, who was suddenly thrown back in time. I know there's a lot of information in this video, but we've made some headway on discussing the bottomless well of ideas you can use to tailor your backstory to incorporate what you want for your character in your game. You can literally do anything with your DM's permission. The most important details to remember when writing your backstory, regardless of whether it's bullet points or a full-fledged story, are: your backstory is your origin story. Have fun with it. It should be fun. Work with your DM and give them what they ask for to create a good story with you. Make sure it fits into their world. Allow your backstory to develop over time. Let it be fluid and organic with room to grow. Make sure you write in what you need to play your character the way you want, but don't use your backstory as an excuse for your character to be a jerk. Don't forget, you're there to tell a collaborative story together with your team of party members and the DM. The goal is for everyone to have fun. If you still have questions about how to write a backstory after watching this video, I would be happy to answer them. You can post them in the comments, or you can visit my Facebook page, which I've linked for you, and ask them there. Players, tell me about your favorite backstory you've ever written. Yes, I'm asking you to tell me about your character. DMs, tell me the most interesting backstory you've received from another player. I look forward to reading them all. If this video was helpful to you, hit those like and subscribe buttons. And if you think I can also be helpful to your friends or fellow players, please share it with them as well. I'll see you in 2 weeks with my next video. Until then, remember, I've got your backstories.